Everyone thinks they know Titanic. You have probably watched it more than once. Maybe you cried at the ending. Maybe you rewound the door scene. Maybe you quoted Jack and Rose to someone you loved. You thought you saw everything this movie had to offer. But here is the truth. There are moments hiding inside this film that the editors, the director, and the entire production team hoped you would never notice. And once you see them, you will never be able to unsee them. These are not small things. Some of them are hiding in the most famous scenes of the entire movie. Right there, in plain sight. And one of them is so unbelievable. It will make you question whether what you have been watching for years was even real at all. Now, before we get into it, let us make one thing very clear. Titanic is one of the most expensive, most carefully made films in Hollywood history. James Cameron was obsessed with getting every single detail right. He built a nearly full-sized replica of the ship. He spent hundreds of millions of dollars. He rewrote scenes over and over again. So when something slips through in a movie this carefully crafted, it is not just a funny mistake. It is a window into exactly how much pressure was behind the scenes and how even the greatest filmmakers in the world are still human. With that said, let us start with one that is hiding inside one of the most intense scenes in the whole film. Picture the moment. Water is flooding the corridors. Rose is running for her life. The ship is sinking around her and everything is chaos. She stops at a fire emergency box on the wall, the kind with a glass panel and an axe behind it. She smashes the glass, grabs the axe, and rushes to save Jack. It is one of those heart-pounding moments where you are gripping the edge of your seat. Except if you slow it down and watch what happens right after she breaks that glass. Something very strange is going on. The glass she just shattered is back. A large piece of it is just sitting there, completely unbroken, like nothing ever happened. No second impact. No explanation. The glass simply returns, as if the ship itself decided to put it back. It lasts only a second before the scene moves on, but once you catch it, you will be staring at that emergency box every single time you rewatch this movie. And that axe does not stop causing problems there. In the very next part of the sequence, Jack is handcuffed to a pipe and the water is rising fast. Rose lifts the axe above her head and swings it down to break the chain. It is one of the most suspenseful moments of the entire film. But look closely at the head of that axe when it hits. It bends. It actually flops on impact like a rubber toy. And that is exactly what it was. The production team made a rubber version of the axe as a safety measure so no one would get hurt during filming. That makes complete sense. The problem is it was never supposed to be that obvious on camera. For just a split second, the most dramatic life-saving moment in the movie looks like something out of a children's toy store. Instead of an axe cutting through metal, you are watching a floppy prop do its best impression of one. But that same scene has even more going on. While Rose is swinging that rubber axe, Jack is supposed to have his suspenders clearly strapped over his shoulders. You can see them in one shot. Then when the cuff actually breaks and the camera cuts to the critical moment, the suspenders are completely gone. And then just like that, in the very next shot, they are back again. The reason is simple but funny. That breaking moment was not filmed with Leonardo DiCaprio at all. A stunt performer stood in for him, and apparently no one remembered to put the suspenders on the double before they rolled the cameras. It is one of those behind-the-scenes moments that slip through to the final cut, and once you know it, you will find yourself checking Jack's shoulders every single time this scene plays. Now let us talk about something hiding in one of the film's quietest and most intimate moments. The sketching scene. Jack drawing Rose like one of his French girls. Everybody remembers this one. But watch what happens right before Rose walks through that door. She is supposed to enter on her own, walking in with that nervous, romantic energy. Except she never actually opens the door herself. If you slow it down, you will see a hand come from inside the room and pull the door open for her. It is clearly a crew member who stepped in to help and was not supposed to be visible on screen. For a scene that is meant to feel so private and emotionally charged, there is a brief moment where a stranger's hand is quietly pushing one of the most iconic scenes in movie history along. It is oddly hilarious when you realize what you are actually looking at. And since we are talking about that sketching scene, Here is something else worth noticing. When Jack puts his first line on the paper, it is thick, bold, and heavy. It is the kind of opening stroke an artist makes when they are feeling confident. But when you see the finished drawing later, that bold first line is completely gone. The final sketch is made up of fine, delicate, carefully drawn lines, with no sign of that first heavy mark anywhere. The reason is that the finished drawing was not actually done by Leonardo DiCaprio in real time. It was made separately by a professional artist before filming. The opening stroke was just part of the performance, never meant to match. But because they used the pre-made drawing as the final product, the two never lined up. It is the kind of continuity mistake that only happens when you are trying to make something look effortless, and the effort accidentally shows through. Here is one that has nothing to do with camera tricks or prop mistakes, but is just as shocking. Jack tells Rose a story about ice fishing on lake with soda back home. He uses it to talk her down from a terrible decision at the back of the ship. It is a beautifully written moment, quiet, real, and deeply human. The problem is that Lake Wissota did not exist in 1912. It was not a natural lake. Lake Wissota is a man-made reservoir created when the Wissota Dam was built in Wisconsin, and that did not happen until 1917, 5 full years after the Titanic went under. So Jack was describing ice fishing on a body of water that was still just land and river at the time. Either he was making the whole story up on the spot to save Rose, which honestly is kind of charming, or the writers simply did not catch it when writing the scene. Either way, one of the most touching moments in the film is built on a lake that technically had not been born yet. Then there is Rose herself. She is sharp, ahead of her time, and always ready with a brilliant comment that leaves the room speechless. In the first-class dining room, she turns to the pompous ship owner Ismay and references Sigmund Freud, making a cutting remark about men and their obsession with size. It is a fantastic moment that gets a big reaction from everyone at the table. The only issue is that the theories she is referencing had not been published yet in 1912. Freud did not connect those particular ideas publicly until after the Titanic had already sunk. So Rose is name-dropping and quoting ideas from a version of Freud that the 1912 world had not met yet. The screenwriters slipped to modern cultural knowledge and dressed it up in Edwardian clothing, and it works brilliantly on screen. But history-wise, Rose was about a decade ahead of the reading list. And while we are on the subject of Rose being slightly ahead of her time, let's talk about that red lipstick she wears throughout the film. It is bold, beautiful, and perfectly fits her rebellious character. But in 1912, a wealthy upper-class woman wearing bright red lipstick in public would have been considered deeply inappropriate. Makeup like that was associated with performers and women from lower social classes, not with the kind of refined high society world Rose was living in. Bold lip color did not become fashionable for women across all classes until the 1920s, when the flapper movement changed everything. The filmmakers gave Rose the lipstick because it visually communicates her personality and her defiance in an instant. And it works. But if you dropped Rose into an actual 1912 first-class dining room wearing that shade, the gasps would have been for a very different reason. Now here is one of the most subtle ones in the whole film, and it involves a reflection that was never meant to be there. In the scene where Jack first steps into the upper-class area of the ship, the camera shifts to show things from his point of view. He walks through a set of elegant glass doors, taking in the polished interiors of a world he has never been part of. But in those glass doors, if you slow the footage down and look carefully at the reflection, you can see the cameraman, not just a blur or a vague shape, an actual silhouette with visible camera equipment reflected back at you through the glass. This is one of the hardest mistakes to find in the film, but once you see it, the magic of the moment gives way to a very brief peek behind the curtain, and you are suddenly watching a film set instead of the grand interior of a ship. Here is one that is harder to explain away with simple filming logistics. Throughout the movie, Rose has a beauty mark on her face. It is part of her look. But if you pay attention across different scenes, that beauty mark keeps moving. In some shots it is on her right cheek. In others, it has shifted to her left. This happens because the editors used a technique called flipping the film, where they mirror an image to make the movement or angles flow better between cuts. When you flip an image, everything on one side of a person's face ends up on the other. So the beauty mark that was always on one side of Rose's face starts traveling back and forth without her ever moving it. In a film where every detail of her appearance was supposedly perfected, her own face could not keep track of where her features were supposed to be. We also need to talk about one of the most beloved moments in the entire film, the shot of Rose holding out her arms at the bow of the ship, with the ocean stretching out in every direction. That is one of the most beautifully crafted images in cinema. But toward the end of the movie, when the survivors are rescued and Rose finally arrives in New York, she looks up at the Statue of Liberty in all its green glory. It is an emotional, symbolic moment. The problem is that in 1912, the Statue of Liberty was not fully green yet. The copper statue had only been standing for about 25 years at that point and was still in the slow process of oxidizing. Historical photographs from the time show a brownish, streaky statue still transitioning toward the green we all know. The filmmakers chose the iconic green version because it carries instant meaning for every viewer. But the real Rose, standing on that deck in 1912, would have seen something much murkier looking up at her from New York Harbor. And finally, the one moment that ties everything together. The one that makes you question something you have believed about this movie for years. There is a scene during the sinking where one of the stunt performers is being thrown downward by the force of the breaking ship. It is a terrifying, chaotic shot. But if you pause it at exactly the right frame, you can see the wires. Not just a hint of them. The actual rigging attached to the performer, visible against the backdrop. The person was not falling because of the ship. They were being pulled by a system of cables just off camera. In a film that fought for every ounce of realism, that one frame cracks the illusion completely open. And yet somehow, across decades of viewers and millions of watches, it made it all the way into the finished film and out into the world. Titanic will always be one of the greatest films ever made. Nothing changes that. But the next time you sit down to watch it, you will not just be watching Jack and Rose fall in love. You will be watching an editor's nightmare, a history teacher's headache, and a filmmaker's greatest achievement all at the same time. So tell me in the comments, which one of these surprised you the most? And if you think you already knew all of them, watch it again. Because if this video proved anything, it is that this film always has one more secret hiding just beneath the surface.